Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to our webinar. This is the Perspectium webinar on integrating ServiceNow at Intermountain Healthcare. Over the next 60 minutes, you're going to hear about how Intermountain Healthcare uses Perspectium to extract data from ServiceNow to merge with data from other systems for detailed analytics. You'll also find out how they move data between their production and sub-production ServiceNow instances and between CMDBs without having to resort to cloning or after-hours batch jobs. And we'll also be showing you a live demo of Perspectium so you can appreciate how much easier it is than any of the alternatives out there. In terms of logistics, everyone is muted on this call, apart from the presenters, of course, but we do want to hear your questions. So just type them into the Q&A panel that you should see on the right side of your screen, and we'll try to get to them, as many of those as we possibly can. Another reminder that today's session is being recorded. So if you love it so much that you want to see it again, or you want to show it to one of your colleagues who wasn't able to join us, you will get a link in an email in a couple of days, and it will also be available on the Perspectium website. My name is Craig McDonough. I will be your host for the webinar today. But before we go any further, I'd like to introduce the real stars of the show today. Firstly, we're excited to be joined by Mike Christensen from Intermountain Healthcare. Mike joined Intermountain Healthcare back in 2003. He started as a respiratory therapist, but ended up moving to IS about 8 years ago, and has spent most of his time administering and developing applications, including Clarity, Project Server, CA Service Desk, CA Service Catalog, and ServiceNow. Now, throughout all of the time that he's been there, he's had an emphasis on reporting and analytics with each of these systems. And as you'll find out, that's a big part of his story today too. Good morning, Mike, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Craig. It's good to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'd also like to introduce Andres D'Ambrosi. He is one of our solution architects from Perspectium. Andres was one of the early innovators at ServiceNow. He held several architect and senior advisory roles there between 2008 and 2014. He joined Perspectium back in 2015 and has helped many of our customers understand just what is possible with Perspectium, and then he's worked with them to actually make it happen. Andres is going to be demoing the Perspectium technology later on today, so you'll get a chance to see it in action. Hi, Andres. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. It's good to be here.
All right. So we'll get back to Mike and Andres in just a moment. But before we do, I'd like to go over the outline for today's webinar, so you know what to expect. We're going to start off with a quick introduction to Perspectium, just to get everyone on the same page, so that everyone on this webinar has an understanding of what it is Perspectium actually does. We'll then hear from Mike about how that has worked within Intermountain Health, and we'll have a conversation with him about that. Following that, as I mentioned earlier, we'll have that live demonstration of Perspectium and questions. Not necessarily at the end. We can take questions all the way through. So if you have any questions as we go through the webinar, feel free to type them into that Q&A panel, and we'll make sure that we get to as many of those as we can. So let's get started. As a quick level set, as I said, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes introducing everyone to Perspectium. Well, we were founded back in 2013 by David Liu. And David, for those that haven't heard of him, was actually the founding developer of ServiceNow. The vision of the company is to enable integrated solutions, delivering information in the right place at the right time, complete with the data control, high availability, and throughput demanded by modern enterprises. And that's the difference. Perspectium delivers integrated solutions. That means we take responsibility for getting your data from A to B. There's nothing to write, assemble, or maintain. We deliver a solution that's complete from end to end. It's all delivered as a subscription service with 24/7 support in monitored and automated data centers with onboarding and any customizations included. So not surprisingly, the company has grown fairly significantly, over 300% per year actually, to where we are today, with many enterprise customers managing over 10 million data exchanges every single day. And we're going to introduce you to some of those companies shortly. But before we do, I wanted to just spend a moment talking about integration as a service and what that actually means. Integration as a service is the modern approach to connecting enterprise applications to one another. It has the following attributes. First of all, control from within the native application. That means control over content, security, and access, meaning you control what data is sent to other applications, both from a field and a record perspective. Availability is built into the product from the ground up. It's an integration technology that was architected for the cloud, and it's delivered in a highly available model, complete with multi-node clustering and a mirrored message bus. So again, that's just a base part of the product built in from the ground up. Throughput. True integration as a service provides an enterprise service bus that allows database loads of 200 records per second per thread, and of course you can add multiple threads. What that means is that Perspectium is able to copy information from your production systems while you're using them without slowing anything down. And then last of all, openness. Integration as a service enables that openness, openness to encourage discoveries and trend everything. You get to create data-driven alerts and bring them all together in one place. And it's actually the combination of all of this that really creates the Perspectium difference. Unlike other integration options, Perspectium is not a do-it-yourself toolkit. We deliver integrated end-to-end solutions maintained and supported by us. Unlike any other solution, all control of your data is managed through a native ServiceNow application, so there's nothing new to learn, and you can incorporate Perspectium into your existing workflows. And unlike all the other options, Perspectium delivers massive data throughput. And as I mentioned, many of our customers exchange tens of millions of transactions every day. And that's something that you just can't do with web services. And these are some of the customers that we spoke about. As you can see, some of the largest, most data-reliant customers in the world have chosen Perspectium to deliver integrated solutions across their businesses. But today we're going to focus in on one of those customers and hear the story from Intermountain Health. Mike, thank you again for joining us.
No problem.
So you joined Intermountain Healthcare quite a few years ago, and you started as a respiratory therapist, huh? How do you move from respiratory therapist into the IS department?
Well, that's a good question. And it has to do with my varied interests. I like doing a lot of different things, and through my college education, I ended up getting a degree in statistics, and which gave me my interest in data. But also, I enjoyed the clinical side. I grew up in a home where my mom was a nurse, and I really admired and liked a lot of the things that she did in her career. So I went through a respiratory therapy school, got that degree, worked there for a little while, but the allure of data and IT kept calling me. So I ended up back in this world again.
Yeah, and so tell us a little bit about your world today. What is your role at Intermountain Health, and what's your responsibility to the business?
Well, at Intermountain Healthcare, we are an idle shop, and we're strong on process and a lot of that ideology. We're currently using ServiceNow for incident request, problem changes. We're using most of the modules. We're not using it for project management or HR or some of those new ones that have come out more recently. So my role on this team was I started out strictly as a ServiceNow developer, largely working with the service catalog and with the incident form and functionality. And as I continued to become more familiar, I started kind of easing back into that reporting life, and my experience made it an easy transition for me. So begin reporting on incidents and changes. Incidents are the one that we report on the most, I think, that we want the highest visibility into. So We started working on that. We also had several different data systems that we wanted to combine, and so that's kind of what prompted our research into you guys as Perspectium as a product.
All right. So can you spend a little time then just talking about sort of those problems that you needed to address, the reason why you kind of came to Perspectium in the first place?
Sure. There's a couple of things that we wanted. One is we have our incident data here in our in ServiceNow that we want to be able to pull reports out on. We also had our Avaya call data that's being tracked in a separate database in a completely different system. We have a couple of other data sources, our project server data, our PeopleSoft data, our SCCM data, the discovery server, computer data. We want to try to bring together. But initially, the problem we want to solve is the Avaya and the ServiceNow data. That was under the highest demand at the time, and we just wanted to get it together in one place where we can report off of it and have it make sense and have it correlate. So that was probably the number one problem we were looking to solve. Another thing we know is ServiceNow is wonderful at creating kind of a single level report and view into the data. It has, I don't know what, 22 or 23 different types of reports that you can pull. But we find that it gets really difficult to try to do a really in-depth analysis. And just one example is hierarchy. Hierarchy is a little more difficult to report on in ServiceNow. If I want to pull a manager and look at his direct reports numbers and look at their direct reports and their direct reports, it was difficult to try to get that information together. And so that's another thing we wanted to try to resolve. Let's see, what else were we looking at? Integrating into a local database. We just wanted to be free to do whatever kind of analytics we wanted to do and address any of the requests that come in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm sure those use cases are ones that are probably resonating with a lot of people on the webinar today. So, talk us through sort of the process. What alternatives did you consider before you decided on Perspectium? Did you take any other approaches to this?
Yeah. So we looked at several different options. It seems that there's only a handful of only a couple of tools probably that do what Perspectium does, that brings the data to a local database, so you have the freedom to do what you'd like with it. We did look at all the other, or not all the other tools, but many of the other tools that are reporting specific tools. Your performance analytics that ServiceNow sells. Some of the others, Numerify. I don't know if I'm allowed to throw names out here, but stop me if I'm not. But yeah, I think we were pretty thorough in looking at the options that are out there. Many of the people that we saw down in this year at Knowledge, we looked at their products and did the demos. I think we settled on. We didn't settle. We ended up using Perspectium. I think because it offered us the most complete solution and the reliability. Some of the local customers, some of your local customers here in Salt Lake City, Utah, use Perspectium and have been quite happy with it. So I think that their endorsement helped us a lot too in making those decisions. One other use case that we had that I didn't bring up earlier that was a problem we were trying to solve was we do like to sync our data from our production to our sub-production environments. And the data that we were syncing was users, groups, and roles. And we had a job that would run at nighttime. The jobs were fairly load intensive and would take quite a while to run. And so Perspectium's allowed us to sync those users, groups, and roles, very easily and very quickly on the fly. We use a dynamic share for that. We also wanted to sync a lot of our CMDB data so that our developers that are working on these sub-production environments had the quickest and most complete view into what our company has, and could develop off of accurate information. So that was another problem that we were trying to solve as we were investigating.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. When we're speaking with other customers, we often also hear that, you know, the alternatives that they looked at included, you know, building the integration themselves, and just, you know, they said, well, we've got developers, we can just create the integration ourselves. That's easy to do, right? Did you go down that path at all?
Yes, absolutely. We actually have a development team of I don't know what we're at, 6 or 7 ServiceNow developers, and we strongly considered that building our own implementation. When we, you know, finally get all the numbers together, what it's going to take to develop it, what it's going to take to support it, you know, we found that it would be a better decision just to buy the product.
Yeah, it's funny that you say. I mean, that's actually a fairly common story that we hear from people. They'll take a look at building it themselves, even ServiceNow themselves, as use Perspectium, you know, rather than trying to build out their own integration. So you ended up with Perspectium, which we're obviously very happy about. But talk us through the implementation. What sort of resources did you need? How long did it take? Who was involved? All that sort of things.
Okay. So as far as resources involved, it's really quite minimal. I was actually surprised how few people we needed to put this together. From the beginning, you know, we started out with a server team. We had to set up a virtual machine with a local database because that was one of our heaviest use cases. So we had a server guy put together a VM for us where we could install our database. And I would guess he was into it probably no more than 20 man hours. Mm-hmm. From there, we have a separate team of DBAs that we had to involve to put the database together to make sure that we have a good monitoring system for production use later on, and we could take advantage of all of their alerting and monitoring that they offer. Again, I would probably guess we used maybe 20, 25, 30 hours at most of our DBA's time to put the database together. Mm-hmm. And it may have been a little bit less than that. There was some of that involves discussion, you know, back and forth. What do you want? Why do you want it? And then us saying, yes, we just really need this, even though you don't normally offer it, you know, for maybe access or the ability to write jobs or things like that. So, yeah. So, yeah, we went through that. As far as on the ServiceNow side, at the beginning, I was the only one involved. I would guess that I probably spent, I don't know, maybe 40 or 50 hours on it. And that was spread out over several weeks. And again, that's meeting with DBAs, meeting with the server guys, and then also the installation of the update set. That actual part of it was really quite simple. We began our proof of concept just a little over a year ago, maybe a year and a couple of months. And I think that the process is quite a bit easier than it was back in that time. But the update set installed really smoothly once we had all the server and the database in place. The configuration was not difficult. So it went pretty well. So roughly 3 different individuals with a total of, you know, and rough estimates, you know, 90 to 100 hours of man hours.
Okay. You mentioned you're exchanging around 1 million records a month. What other sort of results can you share with us? Are you getting the results you were looking for? Are you able to move all of the data that you were hoping to be able to move?
Yeah. So far, I think we're achieving our goals. We're achieving our purpose behind this drive. So now what we need to do is we need to get the data analysts behind it and start generating the reports. We have several tools that we have. I think we have mentioned on this slide here. We have Cognos already, Tableau, IASD, that we have site licenses for, and we have analytics teams. So now the point is to try to combine all of these people and begin generating information that can be used to make decisions across the enterprise. We have this has also inspired us to create a new catalog offering that it specifically addresses, what we can do with this tool, what kind of reports and analytics that are now possible. So that's in QA testing right now, and is about to go live, and we'll be ready to start generating analytics based off of requests. But I think the number one goal we've had is we want to create an analytics team that has the tools which Perspectium provides, and now the ability to do more advanced reporting, but yet filter out the easy stuff that end users can do. Like I said before, ServiceNow has powerful reporting, and it's great for a lot of people. And we want to keep that where it is. Let end users, let managers build their own reports, but then provide this extra level.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. In fact, you sent across a screenshot of a report that's an example of something that you probably couldn't do within ServiceNow, like a more complex report. Can you talk us through this a little bit?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot that's possible with glide records and and scripting in ServiceNow. I think there comes a point where we decide, how much time do we want to spend writing this stuff versus buying an external tool like Perspectium. And this may be possible other ways, but I tell you what, with Perspectium and a local database, it became very easy. And so what this report is doing is this is just looking at the incidents that came in yesterday, and it's saying, what are our top 3 occurring CIs that have happened with incidents? Every incident we create here at Intermountain is attached to a CI, or configuration item. And so this is just pulling the top 3 configuration items that have occurred with their count. Now, within each configuration item, what they wanted to know was, well, what are the top 3 assignment groups that are being assigned to this configuration item? And so we were able to pull that very easily through just SQL queries and display that along with the count. The count was even more than they asked for, but it's so easy to provide when you're just hacking out SQL queries. So this is one that's not easily available in ServiceNow to display, and in their core functionality, or their core reporting system, it's not something that you put together at all.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I'm glad that you're able to get this data now. And you mentioned before sort of a couple of sort of next steps with the new service catalog offering. What else? Where else do you see Perspectium potentially helping out Intermountain Health in the future?
Well, one of the ways that we would like to move forward with this is integrating with other systems. And on that first slide of ours that you showed, where we have the different systems, we have our project server database. There's some difficulties with getting at that data and inserting or exporting some of the time tracking data in there. And so we'd like to find a way to sync with that, so we can tie an incident to a project inside of our project server, and have the data, if it's entered in ServiceNow, go directly to project server. So that's something we're looking to do in the future. Maybe a little further out in the future, we have our PeopleSoft system that we use for procurement. Might like to find a way to sync the data between those two, because what we find now is we have entries being submitted through our service catalog, and then also have to be entered basically again, and we lose a lot of man hours this way into the procurement system with PeopleSoft.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Perspectium gives us that ability. There'll still be some development hours that are going to need to go into each of those efforts, but it makes it so it's possible to start to tie these systems together. I think ideally, you know, in our perfect world, we have all of our systems that can communicate with each other, at least in some way, and sync relevant data that and eliminate duplicate entries.
Yeah, yeah. Let the sort of the business processes determine what happens rather than the application boundaries.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's great, Mike. Thank you for the overview. It's great to sort of, you know, get that whole picture of what's happening at Intermountain Health. Just a quick reminder too that if anyone does have any questions, you can type them into that Q&A panel, and we will get to some of those if we get a chance. But yeah, please type any questions in. Right now we don't have any questions for Mike. So if you were to jump in now, you'd probably get the first one. But I tell you what, while we get those questions coming in, what I'd like to do now is to just to say sort of thank you to you, Mike, for now, and I'd like to move across to Andres and get him to give us a little bit of a look at the product and how it all works and how it all fits together, just so people can see what it is we've been talking about. Andres, if you should have the screen.
I do. Thank you very much, Craig, and thank you, Mike. And I am going to be starting out describing a little bit of the Perspectium architecture, and then we'll get right into product demonstration. So I have shared my screen, and the first slide I have up is the architecture of Perspectium itself, integration as a service. Okay. So one of the key aspects to the way that Perspectium Replicator is architected is the message broker service. And so you've heard references to that in regards to getting ServiceNow data out of ServiceNow into a database, as well as synchronizing data. Heard also that data targets and endpoints that would like to be added to the integration. So the way that works is that anything that can read or write to the message broker service can integrate with anything else. So in the case of ServiceNow, what we've done is created a native application that gets installed into ServiceNow, and that can then communicate with the message broker service. And then in regards to a database, we utilize a database agent because typically databases are not exposed to the internet, and then it communicates with the message broker service. And we can integrate a number of different applications. We have native applications for some web applications like ServiceNow and Salesforce. Other times we utilize the API, but all of this is based on delivering this integration as a service. So our platform, the message broker service, is delivered as a service as well. It's something that we host within an Amazon EC2 data center, and that allows us to have a lot of flexibility and very quick time to value in regards to the way we implement our product. We also know that placing data onto a broker service like this, hosted in a hosted environment, can bring up some security concerns. So what we do is we encrypt data at the source and decrypt at the target. So in the case of going to a database, that data from ServiceNow is encrypted inside of ServiceNow and then set, and then decrypted at the database side, as well as between ServiceNow instances. And we have a lot of options that way. Okay. So again, the architecture around how to get data in and out of ServiceNow really is, can you get data to the message broker service? And so what that allows us to do in regards to the second slide is we have a number of deployment options in being able to communicate with that message broker service. The simplest one is what Intermountain is doing between their ServiceNow instances. You just simply install the replicator application on each instance of ServiceNow. So that top diagram describes ServiceNow communicating with another ServiceNow instance. And this also could apply to Salesforce because we have those native applications. And so the implementation time from a technology standpoint is extremely fast. And all your configuration is done in the native interfaces of those web applications. The bottom diagram is how we would communicate with a database. And that's, again, because databases are typically not exposed to the internet, that communication with the message broker service is facilitated by this agent. This agent's installed within a customer's environment, and so it was installed within Intermountain's environment. And it also knows how to do a couple of other things, including decrypting the data that's sent from ServiceNow, and also translating the ServiceNow data schema to the appropriate data schema for the database that you'll be utilizing. So the agent itself can set up tables and fields for you automatically in the database. So you immediately have reportable data and you can run your analytics tools against that data. And then the middle diagram describes applications or even other APIs, including to outside providers, that we can interface with to our message broker service and then retrieve the data into ServiceNow. So a lot of different options. In today's demonstration, we'll talk about ServiceNow to ServiceNow. I even have called out in the diagram these data queues. Each one of our customers have multiple data queues dedicated to their data. We never mix data with anyone else's, any other customer's data. And these data queues will facilitate the transfer of data between all the different applications, ServiceNow to ServiceNow, and then ServiceNow to a database. Okay, so that's very high level, our architecture and how we facilitate the data replication between our applications. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into the actual application. And our first scenario will be ServiceNow to a database. And then that way you can report off of it against with an application like Tableau. All right. So the first thing that you'll notice is when I come into my ServiceNow instance, I have the Perspectium application already installed. Again, it's through an update set. And the way to navigate to that is just like you would any other application in ServiceNow. I can type in Perspectium. You already saw me have that written there. That gives me the replicator application, which gives me a home page. So imagine now within ServiceNow, you can see all the integrations to and from ServiceNow. And you can report off of those. You can get notified of those. You also can have a home page that gives you status around those integrations. So I have some dynamic shares. Dynamic shares are real-time share of data out of ServiceNow to the message broker service. We have bulk shares, which allow me to schedule or execute immediately in an on-demand fashion a transfer of data based on filters from ServiceNow out to the message broker service. So even in regards to managing what data you share, you can tweak it. The beauty is you're not at the mercy of a separate interface nor web services that can be costly from a performance standpoint, but also are obscured right within code, placed within business rules behind a bunch of different separate tables. That's not the way our product works. Our native application does not utilize web services to communicate with the message broker service, but instead can post and get the data through HTTPS. And that means you can have complete control over what you're sharing and what you're subscribing to. So I can come in and click on dynamic share, and I can see right here all of the tables that I'm currently sharing data from to different applications. Okay. I also have the option to then, in another instance of ServiceNow, of course, having my replicator application installed, to subscribe to that data. And then we'll get into this in the second use case as I describe it. But again, the ServiceNow interface is very simple to use. You have all the information and you have the control both on the share side and the subscribe side. Okay. So in my scenario, I'm going to be using MySQL as the database. And I've got MySQL Workbench, where currently I only have this user table. I have no other tables available for me to report against in the MySQL database. And I'm going to be using Tableau, which I already have set up a report, but I don't have the incident and the CMN location table. The location table within ServiceNow, I don't have any data In fact, those tables don't even exist right now, as you can see here, just this user. And I want to create a report based on that data. So the first thing that I'd want to do is come into Perspectium, come over to my bulk share, and I'd like to set up a new bulk share. So a bulk share allows me to come in and provide a name and a table. So in this case here, I'd like to provide some, actually let's start with locations for my report. And because it's a native application, I can choose from any table in ServiceNow. Okay, so that includes even custom tables that you created yourself. Again, a native application provides you access to the entire ServiceNow data schema. So I chose the location table. And in here, I'm also going to target my database. So we can utilize target queues to decide what endpoint that is connected to the message broker service do I want to send my data to. Okay. I have some other options here, including if I want to send attachments, embedded images and videos, journal fields, audit log, lots of options here. Again, the beauty of this native application is it's all available. I also can filter the data. So I could say only certain locations using the condition picker, which again is very similar, something very familiar to those who've used ServiceNow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to execute this now. I want all my locations to go over to my report. And so I have scheduled that bulk share to begin sending data to my database. Okay, and those records are going to start to appear in what we call our outbound replicator queue, outbound message queue. And so I can pull that up here, and as it starts to generate those messages, I'm going to start seeing them appear. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull one up to show you what a message looks like. So what we do is we take the record, we provide a header to the message, so we know where it goes, and we encrypt the data. So this value here is completely encrypted. Using an encryption key that you, as the customer, have complete control over, and we do not have any access to. Okay, so your data is completely secure. So I'm sending over location data to my database. Now, the second thing that I want to do is I want to set up some incidents to go along with those locations. So I'm going to say incidents for my report. And doing the same thing, I'm going to go and choose the table that I would like to report off of or have data available for my report. And so I'm going to choose incident. And this time, I'm going to filter these. I'm going to say only those incidents where the location is not empty. I'm going to get location incidents with locations. And then I'm going to make sure that it's going to the right queue, which is my database queue. And I'm going to save this. Okay, so now the bulk share ready to run. Okay, and I've included a filter so I don't send everything from my incident table. I'm going to execute this now. And so within a few seconds, I'm going to now start sending incidents, just like I sent locations. You can see that's already complete. We've sent 421 locations. My incidents are going to start up creating these outbound messages, just like you saw for location. And more importantly, what's going to happen here, as you can see my incidents going over, is within MySQL, a couple things are going to occur that I didn't have to really do anything myself to achieve. Okay, the first thing is that the tables are going to be created for me. So you can see I already have my CMN location table, and that came from my locations that I inserted, and it set up my columns for me as well. And those columns have the correct height and length, all updated from the ServiceNow data schema. So even when you add new fields, they get added to the table, and the data within those new fields are added as well. So in a short time, I'm going to also have my incident table that just arrived. So now I have my incidents and all their columns. And more importantly, now I can come over to my server and I can log in. And now I have got my incidents and my locations. And so I will now have a report. In this case, I'm just taking my incidents based on the location, superimposing them on a map of the United States. And I can see, for instance, that I've got a priority 2 incident over in San Diego. I've got 3 priority 4 incidents in Denver. Okay? So there I've used bulk share to populate a database and get the data made available to Tableau to create a report from it pretty easily. Now, the other thing that also occurs is I'm going to want to keep my reports up to date in real time. And so what I have available is a dynamic share. So the dynamic share is a near real-time share of data based on some conditions very similar to the bulk share. Okay. Again, it's a native application, so I have access to the entire ServiceNow data schema. And in here, I'm going to set certain trigger conditions. So when an incident is created or when it's updated, I want to send that over. Okay. I also want to come over here and make sure it's sent to my database. So I have a database queue that my database agent is monitoring. And I'm filtering this. I'm only saying that where the category is database, those are the incidents that I want to send. So now I have a real-time share of incident data. So I can come over here to incidents, and I can create a new incident. And in this case, I'm going to set my category to database so that I know that my dynamic share will be triggered. And I can make this a critical priority. And I'm going to say that this incident occurred in Texas. So I'm going to say Texas incident, and we'll just leave it at that. And then I can submit it. So my dynamic share is monitoring the table. And when I submit that incident, then I'm going to get another share, another message generated that's going to be directed to my database. And so now I have an incident.insert. So the bulk was a bulk share. That .insert was a dynamic based on a specific trigger, which was the insert of the incident. Okay, so that has been sent. It looks very similar to the way you saw the bulk share messages. I've got a header up at the top. I've encrypted the values here. Okay, and so within my SQL Workbench, I've got the ability to view my incidents. There's my Texas incident, and more importantly, now my report can utilize this, and I can have this in real time. So this can continually send the data over. Now I have a incident over in Texas that I didn't have before, and now anytime there's an update or a change to an incident with location or priority or whatever my report is depending on, I can have that immediately available. Okay. All right. So very quickly, I was able to share data that automatically created my tables and fields and set up everything I needed to in my database without me having to do any work on my side. And I was able to then report off of that data right away. I didn't have to then massage it or work my DBA to get it into the right types or lengths or anything like that. So very quickly, using Perspectium, I was able to report off of this data. The other scenario is where I want to send some data to another instance of ServiceNow. So you've already seen in this instance that I have some dynamic shares set up. Okay, so you saw the dynamic share set up to send data to a database. I also have a dynamic share set up to be able to send it to another instance of ServiceNow. So in this case, I selected the incident table again. I also have directed it to a target queue where my other instance of ServiceNow is watching and waiting. And I also have my trigger conditions set, okay? On this instance of ServiceNow, where I'm going to be sending it to, under Replicator, I go under something called subscribe, okay? So subscribe says, okay, you're going to retrieve data, but I would like to control that. I want to make sure that I want to receive that data. So control on both sides, visibility on both sides, and now you know exactly what's coming in and out of ServiceNow. You're not dependent on something that was coded up years ago or hoping you understood what someone else created for you. The maintenance is the same. I select a table. I even select the trigger conditions that I am going to accept. And I can filter that data further. So I don't want anything that has a correlation ID set right now. So those are the incidents I want to send over. So all I have to do, in this case, category is hardware. So I'm going to come over to incident, and I'm going to create new, and I'm going to then set hardware, and I can say incident from first SN instance, and I can submit it. And when I do, there is going to now be a message created in my outbound queue. Well, first, it's encrypted. The message is created, it's encrypted, and then it's placed in the outbound queue, and then my other instance of ServiceNow through the subscription is going to pick it up. So I can come in here to inbound, and at some point I'm going to receive, I already did, receive this incident. It looks very similar to the outbound. I have a message created, got the header up here, I've got the value in encrypted format, okay? And that means that I also can then come over to my incidents and I would have that data in sync, okay? That I receive my incident from the first ServiceNow instance. And then again, this can be used in the case of Intermountain to synchronize users and groups and locations, used between a prod and a sub-prod so that you can then test your next set of code or clone over some data. It's also great from an e-bonding scenario where you want to e-bond even to production instances of ServiceNow. Of course, also, as you saw in the diagram, we can bond a number of different systems together in regards to our product. Okay, so at this point, that's the end of my demonstration and description of the architecture. And hopefully you found that informative and understand how Perspectium works just a little bit better. So I'm going to turn this back over to Craig at this point.
Thank you, Andres. And yes, that was a fantastic demonstration. One question that did come in actually while you were doing that was to do with the SIAM integrations. And the question was, how does SIAM work if the other party is using ServiceNow but they don't have Perspectium? Do both parties need to have Perspectium in order for those SIAM integrations to work?
So they do not. So typically our customers have two options. There's a customer who wants to integrate to another vendor or provider or someone else on the outside. Then they themselves can subscribe to Perspectium and offer their provider or customer the update set, just like they've installed the update set in their instance of ServiceNow, and then use the native interface to integrate the two. But if the other provider does not want to or cannot install the update set to have the native interface on their side, the customer still can install the native application in their instance, and then we can integrate our message bus through the ServiceNow's own native API, REST or SOAP, to be able to do to have it integrate to our message bus. We have two options there.
Right. Okay. That's great. Thank you. One other question came in from Mike as well. So, Mike, going back to the discussion about what you've done at Intermountain, were you able to replace any of the in-house custom integrations that you may have had in place with the work that you've done with Perspectium, or was this all done for like unintegrated processes? The attendee was just wondering about the time and cost it may have displaced.
Well, we replaced all of the syncs that we had created previously, the custom syncs between environments. As far as integrations with outside products, it really didn't replace anything. It just added the ability to do that. And then, a lot of what I mentioned is still future that we would like to accomplish, as in coming days. So yeah. As far as straight cost, I couldn't assign a dollar amount really at this point. I think we gained some efficiencies on our system through replacing the users and the group syncs that we're having on a nightly basis. But that's probably what I would identify at this point.
Okay, great. Well, maybe we'll catch up with you again when you've got through some of those future projects, and maybe at that point we might have some more sort of dollar figures that you can relate to it.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, hey, thank you, Mike and Andres, for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. It's been great to have you on the webinar today.
My pleasure.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks also to everyone who joined the webinar. Thank you for joining us and spending the time with us, running through what they've been able to achieve at Intermountain Health, and also that demonstration from Andres. Just a quick reminder too: this session was recorded, and we will be sending out a link to the recording shortly. So share it with your colleagues and anyone else who wants to learn more about those integrated solutions, or about obtaining integrated solutions with ServiceNow. And of course, the other place you can learn a lot more about different use cases for Perspectium is on the Perspectium website. You'll find a wealth of information there, including a huge list of use cases, an ROI calculator, and you can read about some other customer stories as well. So I'd encourage you certainly to take a look there. Thank you again. We will see you at our next webinar in July.